Welcome back, friends. We are reading chapter 16 tonight. This chapter is also pretty long as well, so we're going to cut it in half. I felt it flows better that way. 16. Rolling Thunder's Many Roles. We were on our way west by midnight. We would take Route 80 through Reno, over the Sevier Nevadas, down to the Sacramento Valley, and then to my sister's home in Berkeley. It was over 450 miles from Carlin to the coast, and we'd be driving from midnight to midday. Spotted Eagle drove first. He felt he could stay awake for at least a few hours. Rolling Thunder held his pipe and his tobacco, but he did not smoke. By the time we got through Carlin and turned onto Highway 80, he was slumped in his seat with his chin upon his chest. The highway was empty at this time of night, except for an occasional overland truck coming from the west. The sky was without moon or stars. Silhouettes of the distant hills blended into the night. We made the long, straight stretch of road to Battle Mountain. Then in the dark hills the road began to wind. Rolling Thunder made a sudden gasp as though he had been surprised in a dream. He lifted his head and looked at the road. As we rounded a tight bend, we came upon a large bird sitting in the road. It stretched its huge wings to lift itself, but it was too late. There was a loud whack as the car struck the bird. The three of us gasped as Rolling Thunder had done. As far as we could tell, the bird flew on. Rolling Thunder shook his head, and then rested it against the back of his seat and closed his eyes again. In the light of the approaching dawn, I could begin to see Spotted Eagle in the rear-view mirror. He looked tired. I asked him if he felt sleepy, but he wanted to go on. The light grew brighter, and several times Spotted Eagle began to close his eyes. Each time that happened, Rolling Thunder would lift his head at Spotted Eagle, and Spotted Eagle's eyes would come alive for a time. We stopped for gas and Rolling Thunder took the wheel through Winnemucca, then Lovelock, and into Reno for breakfast. Rolling Thunder drove out of Reno, but we had not gone far before he pulled off on the side of the road to sleep. He said 10 minutes would be enough. After 10 minutes he awoke, cheerful and laughing, his eyes bright. During all that time Spotted Eagle was driving, he must have been doing something other than sleeping. We reached my sister's home in Berkeley by mid-afternoon. Rolling Thunder stopped briefly and then went on. My feeling was that he had some pretty heavy business in the Bay Area, for which he had spent the past few days preparing. I knew vaguely he had asked to come as a healer or a guide in response to people who would ask for his help. He didn't tell me what his plans were, and I didn't ask. After he left me in Berkeley, I did not see him for several days. I had my own business. I felt it was part of my work to maintain communication with members of the Committee of the Concern for the Traditional Native. My association with Rolling Thunder was based on his idea that we learn the truth by struggling against ignorance in ourselves and in our surroundings. Together, self and surroundings are man's condition. I had observed that the committee people I met in Shoshone country, Sarah Greensfelder, John Welsh, Ed O'Neill, and others, were both working and learning, and they maintained their motivation by the belief that working and learning were the same process. They were in touch with many traditional Native people. They saw the traditional people's way of life as a spiritual statement, a message for man. It was the content of this message that I had set out to find. In early August, I joined committee members at the Ecology Center in San Francisco to hear David Montague, a spokesman for the traditional Hopi. The Hopi are thought to be the custodians of the spiritual doctrine of traditional Native Americans. These teachings and prophecies are written down and kept in secret Hopi villages. Traditional natives from many places were known to quote Hopi prophecies. These prophecies are said to have foretold the major wars, the constant oppression of sovereign peoples living upon this land, the recent manipulation of governments in the Far East, and the creation of the UN headquarters on Manhattan Island. also known as the land of the Iroquois. They predicted the moon landings, space stations, and an increasing ecological desecration of the continent. The Hopi accurately estimate the timing of these predictions by the order and the relationship of the foretold events. Thus, the Hopi and other traditional natives have been waiting and watching for people like those in the audience at the Ecology Center. The ultimate hope and help for the oppressed native peoples, say the prophecies, is to come from the light-skinned people themselves, from the sons and daughters of the oppressors. The day would come, it was written, when the children of the white man would begin to dress like natives, when they would begin to wear long hair and headbands as the Hopi do, and these people would be the new friends of the native. I had heard about David Montague in camp some weeks ago, and I had seen a picture of him. At the center, he looked older and smaller than I had expected. He was 80 years old and nearly blind. Sarah Greensfelder introduced him to the audience. "Just feel free to ask any questions," she said. There was a silence. He stood up and took some tiny particles from his pocket. He held them between his fingers and thumb close to his face and moved his lips as I had seen Rolling Thunder do. Then he gave the offering to Sarah, and she took it outside and laid it on the sidewalk in the sun. He sat down, and for a long while no one spoke. "Do you have a question?" David asked. David was asked about the conditions at Hopi Land and about the strip mining at Black Mesa. He spoke about the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the government-formulated tribal councils, the management of reservation land and people, and the breaking of treaties. I had thought about these issues as native problems, but now I learned that natives considered them the white man's problems. Up home, there are a lot of things going on. In the first place, these Mormon people have forced themselves in and are building houses up there, right down on the further side of First Mesa. And the chief there didn't want that. He is trying to get it done away with, but the Mormons are pretty strong, and they are just about finished. The chief has the authority to give anyone permission, but they've forced themselves in, and they are building a Mormon church. In another village, they are trying to put up a low-cost housing project. That is a very sacred place and should not be desecrated. But they are trying to build a low-cost housing project where the Snake Dance Society performs their snake dance. We were instructed not to follow any policy of the Indian Bureau, because their intention is to take our land and whatever really belongs to the Indian people. As you have noticed, most of the Indian people have no land. Their land has already been taken away from them. They have no more rights to their land, no more rights to their water, no more rights to their timber. Their rights have been taken from them. Therefore, we don't want to take part in any tribal council. Before these things were formed way back, we were warned not to take part in any kind of clubs or councils that would be newly formed. By doing that, we will only defeat ourselves. These other people around us, our own Indian people, have fallen into the hands of the Indian Bureau, and they have been defeated. They are only depending on the Indian Bureau to borrow a lot of money so they can build houses, build roads. They're not looking ahead. When they borrow money from the Indian Bureau, that's how they get tricked. They run into debt, and that's how they get caught. That's how they lose their land. Now we are counting on you. As I have said before, you have a right to protest against these things. We don't want to lose our land. We still are kind of a nation. We want to be left alone to do things in our own way. We want to live. We want to retain our life the way we've been living way back. Way back, the life was good. The people respected one another. They were getting along fine. Way, way back. If you do things right, you're Hopi too. If you have not done something wrong, which might be contrary to the law of the Great Spirit, if you are doing something that is right, you will also be called Hopi. Even if you are not this color or skin, you also would be called Hopi. Hopi means peace. The name Hopi means peace. It's very hard to do things in the right manner. But as long as we do things right, we are in tune with the Great Spirit. No one can do away with our belief, or with the Hopi people, because we have a pretty firm belief in the Great Spirit's life plan, and we are still trying to follow that. We were told even if we be going on a stumbled road, not to get discouraged. We must put a stop to this strip mining. Most of us do not have good health, and we will be the first ones to suffer from the smog and pollution and all the destruction. When the smog will spread all over, it will affect the whole system of people, all the little animals, the birds, the trees, vegetation, and all things will be ruined. Everything will be polluted. That is why we are much concerned. We would like to have that done away with. We would like to have it stopped completely. Some of our people are for this strip mining. They are the ones who are fighting against us. They should love the people instead of fighting them. They should pray for whoever is in need of help. In our religious services, we pray for all people, no matter what skin color, and for all the animals, and all things around us in Mother Earth. I always say we have our own church within our hearts. You have your own church right in here. If you follow that within your heart, you are doing something right with the Great Spirit's instructions. You can follow your own heart even if you do not go to church. That's the way we've been told. You know, sometimes in the morning, sometimes we don't feel good. Sometimes we feel angry, depressed about something. Of course, sometimes we feel hatred. We all have some arguments with some other people. But if you have trouble with some other man, and you hate that man and think, I'd wish he'd die and go away, you are just working against yourself. The other man may not be feeling angry towards you, but you are angry at him and thinking thoughts against him. You're just working against yourself. You're bringing pain into your own heart. The other man cannot affect you in any way, but if you hate him and you're going after yourself, you'll hurt yourself with your own bad feelings. Sometimes we don't feel good, and sometimes we have some kind of illness, some fear, some imagination, and we just don't want to mingle with other people. If you come out from your house, and if some people are standing over there, maybe half a dozen people talking about something, you think they're talking about you. You think they might be criticizing you, but they're not talking about you. Go up to them and talk with them. And if they talk about some happy things, and if they are laughing, join with these people. That's the only way you can do away with your fear or anger or depressed feeling. When you come to people who are happy and who laugh, join with them. That's the only medicine. Happiness is the only thing for people. If we respect one another and not hate one another, we'll all be united, and we will all be happy people. Many questions were asked, and most of the answers were long. In all, David Montague talked for over 3 hours, and while he was speaking, my mind went back to some of my conversations long ago with Swami Rama and, more recently, with Rolling Thunder. They were really all talking about the same thing, the happiness that could be found within the heart, the disciplines of the mind and body, the techniques for working on the self and for living in harmony with nature. The committee people hoped that Rolling Thunder would appear at the Ecology Center, but he was busy somewhere else in the Marin County north of San Francisco. We would see him the following night at the Corn Feast and Round Dance in San Rafael. During the time that Rolling Thunder was in Marin County, I stayed in Berkeley with my sister and brother-in-law. We were joined by Antoinette Dali Gazzodi, a science writer for the National Institute of Mental Health, who has been associated with the Voluntary Controls Project at the Menninger Foundation. While I was there, I tried to tell them about everything that had happened in the past few weeks. There was hardly time. I did mention the Shoshone need for legal help, and we discussed the possibilities of communicating with Berkeley lawyers. During my stay in the city, I hoped to make contact with a lawyer, perhaps a young law graduate, who might be interested in working among the Shoshone people in Nevada. The only time that I have ever recorded Rolling Thunder's voice had been in July 1971. He was sitting under a tree by a stream not far from camp, speaking to members of the Committee of Concern for the Traditional Native. There is no justice under law on the reservations. Off the reservations, there is sometimes a pretense of some type of trial, but in most of all cases where natives are involved, natives are advised to plead guilty with the promise they'll get a reduced sentence. That is never the case. The Indian is always, without exception, convicted. In cases where Indians are murdered, sometimes by ex-convicts or criminals, sometimes in cases where it is known who the guilty parties are, nothing is ever done. We would like to have some resort to law to get these cases into proper court, to make appeals to federal courts where we know that there would be a better chance of justice. We would like, if we could, to have some dedicated young lawyers come here and stay. Of course, we realize that they would need not only knowledge of the law, but that they would also need to be very dedicated because the forces of establishment don't like any opposition. They would try to intimidate any such attorneys and probably try to run them out of this country. We listened to these words on my cassette recorder in Berkeley. My sister contacted Jim Woods, a lawyer friend, and talked to him about the lack of legal representation for Shoshone people in Nevada, and about the chaining of the pinyon trees to provide grazing land on native treaty territory. He was interested in meeting Rolling Thunder. We agreed on a meeting within the week. That evening we would see Rolling Thunder in San Rafael. With luck, the arrangement could be made then. We drove together to San Rafael. There in a place called the Kundalini Ashram was a large crowd. About half of them were Native Americans. I had met some of the younger natives in Nevada, but most of the others I had never seen before. We arrived just after the corn feast was over, but before the dancing had begun. I wanted to introduce David Montague to my sister and brother-in-law, but he was pressed in by groups of people and it seemed futile. We found Rolling Thunder surrounded by people eager to talk or listen to him. I had to tell Rolling Thunder about the tentative agreement with Jim Woods in Berkeley. When I had a chance to talk to him, I explained we had contacted Woods. "Tell the lawyer I'll be there," he said. From the other room came the sound of drums. Then a voice, lively and rhythmic, began a sort of dialogue with the drums. Everyone listened. It was David Montague, Standing in the center of the largest room with a circle forming around him, this little old man was producing a powerful and moving sound. Soon everyone in the room had joined that circle, and I wondered whether David knew how large a crowd this was. He glanced about blankly. He was seeing what was in his head, not what was in the room. He was beside himself with mirth, cockily hitting his drum and tapping his foot, and occasionally missing a beat to sweep his arm through the air to insist that awkward circle begin to turn. Finally, we made a double ring and people got into the swing of the dancing. Some began to catch and repeat the Hopi words. Everyone seemed deeply involved. But as the dance went on, some tired and dropped out. David Montague did not tire. He picked up the pace. When the dancers became too few to make a ring around David, the dance stopped, but David did not. He became a performer, and his audience sat around him on the floor. He introduced ridiculous-sounding songs with funny English words and tried to induce the audience to join him. David will go on all night, someone said. He'll never stop. We'll all get old and die, and David will be singing songs. Suddenly, David stopped. The whole place became silent. What's happening? Rolling Thunder's going to do a war dance. Rolling Thunder was in the center. He wore his usual loose-fitting clothes, but his pants and shirts were decorated with native designs. He had brightly colored bands around his cuffs, and on those bands were bells. The drums began to sound again. Now the beat was slow and steady, and the tone was heavy. As Rolling Thunder began to dance, all the people sitting on the floor craned their necks to see the stomping feet that were producing the rhythmic mesmerism of the bells. I had never seen Rolling Thunder dance before. I could have watched for hours, but it lasted only a moment. Everyone wanted to see more, but Rolling Thunder left the room. The drums changed their pattern, and David resumed his singing. Some went out with Rolling Thunder and urged him to dance again. In a short while he came back, and the war dance was repeated. Again, Rolling Thunder left the room, and again, David returned to his songs. And that is where we will stop with this chapter today, my friends. We'll be back soon. Thank you very much. Nyawa.